He started with Adam and Eve. And He gave them innocence. They didn't have the knowledge of evil that we do. They were innocent. And they failed. Because when it came right down to it, they didn't believe His word. And then He gave mankind a conscience. And that conscience worked all the way from Adam and Eve to the time of Noah and the great flood. And it failed. They failed, resulting in the flood. In fact, every thought of man at that time was wicked continually. And that used to shock me a lot when I think, well, how could somebody just think bad thoughts all the time? But it's the end result of man without God. He just gets more and more and more wicked, more self-involved. And so then God gave them human government. And human government only lasted for a couple of years till the Tower of Babel, where the human government itself tried to build their own way to heaven. They tried to build a tower that would take them to heaven without God. They could reach it by their own efforts without God. That's what they wanted, make a name for themselves. So they failed again. And then the Lord picked out a special people, and He picked out the Jewish nation, and He gave them the law, which means that they were not only given promises, miracles, signs and wonders, but also exact instructions on what they had to do to please God. Exact instructions. That's what you hear a lot of people say, that they did something wrong. Say, well, if I'd only known that I really had to do that exactly, I'd have done it right. Well, they had exact instructions, and they failed. And then came our time. The time after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, where Paul introduces to us salvation by grace, through faith, in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who died for our sins. And how many people will listen to you today? So just like in the time of the Jews, it works for those who believe, but the vast majority of humanity is still just walking by and not paying any attention to it. Even some pastors, if you go and tell them, wait a minute, I'm a minister of reconciliation, and the Lord tells me that I'm supposed to tell you that you can't be saved by your own worthiness, by your own works, by anything that you do. You can only be saved by what Jesus Christ did, and that's it, by believing in what He did for us. I will get an argument from a lot of pastors today, because even with them, they have failed to understand the gift that God gives us. And then we had those 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth that we looked at in Revelation. For 1,000 years they're living under the Lord. There's peace. Everything's fine. And at the end of those 1,000 years, up comes Satan, and the massive amount of humanity rebel and attack Jerusalem where Jesus Christ reigns. Man, you talk about deceived. I wonder if they would have crucified Him again, if God hadn't just burned them all up when they came close to the city of Jerusalem. They all made their choice. And when mankind chooses to live without God, he always fails. I mean, that's the history of the Bible. That's the history of us. And that's the history of mankind. That's why we're in the mess we're in. That's why this world is in such a condition in our country. That's why we have wars and everything that's going on. Let's go back to the beginning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. First verse in the Bible, and so we know that in the Bible it's right at the beginning, and it's right at the beginning of our timeline. It's the first thing that happened in our timeline. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Where we're told, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And we know when we read a little bit after that, He not only created the heaven and the earth, He gave man free will. He gave man the ability to make up his own mind, to make his own decisions. He gave him free will. And after 1,500 years of this free will, that's how long it took, 1,500 years of this free will, there was almost nothing but evil left. Think about that. Man saying, do you want to do right or do you want to do wrong? In 1,500 years, let's read it. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Today, to a great extent, mankind is looking for what's best, what's in his own interest. And if you find anybody that's done most anything, and you ask them to defend their actions, they'll defend their actions on the grounds that it was in their own interests, that it was good for them. Well, if all we're looking for is what's good for us, if that's what we think about all the time, then we're thinking evil continually. Because that's not what we were made for, is to think about what was good for us. So, every imagination of the thoughts and the heart were continually evil. What a terrible sight it must have been to God, looking down and seeing what was going on. But notice this about these verses, that the evil that he saw was not in what they did. It wasn't in their actions. He didn't say he saw a bunch of actions, but in the thoughts of their hearts. That's what he's looking at. That's what he judged them by the thoughts of their hearts. It has always been what's in our hearts that count. Action will follow our heart condition. But action is just a symptom of our heart condition. It's just a natural thing that follows what our character and what our attitude is. And it's the heart that matters to God. The actions will follow. What has happened to the religious world is they turn that around. And they say you have to act humble. You have to act loving. You have to act good. And that separates us from God, because we don't need God to act humble. And we don't need God to act good. But we need God to be humble, and to be good, and to be kind, and to be loving. And so when we know that that's what he wants, that he sees our hearts, not our actions, and what he wants is perfection, then that leads us to admit to him that we don't come anywhere close to that. That our hearts are rotten, that we're sinners, that the sins that we commit don't make us sinners. We're sinners through and through, and the sins that we commit are just the symptoms of that disease that is inside of us. And when it turns the other way and we turn ourselves over to the Lord, and one day we actually notice that we're a little kinder than we used to be, that's just a symptom of what the Lord's doing inside of us. And that's the way he wants to do it. That's what this whole story of this Bible is all about, is that he does the work inside, and then it just comes out naturally. We don't concentrate on bringing something out that isn't there. That's where we become hypocrites. We concentrate on getting on our knees and asking the Lord to put something there so that we can see something come out that can help us to see the changes that are happening inside of us.